How do we heal permanently from complex PTSD? I'm going to take you through the 4 different steps today that it takes to really overcome complex PTSD. And these are the kind of 4 main areas, and it might not happen exactly sort of in linear succession, but these are the 4 areas that I think that I observe have happened to me as a survivor and now thriver after complex PTSD. And these are also the same 4 things that I take my clients through when we do this work together. So I want to give you a little bit of an overview. First of all, I feel it's important to mention that complex PTSD is not yet recognised as its own thing in the DSM-5, but for the sake of the work that I do and the way that we talk about trauma as people and survivors, and hopefully eventually thrivers after trauma, I think the distinction is really important. And that's because when we go through something that has caused simple PTSD, and obviously it's only called simple PTSD because of the way it happened, not because it's easier to live with, there's no comparison. It's still is very rough to live with for most folks. But the reason it's different is because simple PTSD or regular PTSD, we can very clearly pinpoint exactly when it happened. It's often maybe it's happened in an event, or maybe there was a couple of events, but we can very clearly link it back to a specific thing. So that could be a catastrophic weather event. It could be some military folks might have had one particular bad day where something went off and they witnessed some not so nice things. And it could be that we were maybe assaulted once or twice. Those things fit into simple PTSD because yes, they're traumatic things that happen, and yes, it's caused a trauma in our brain. And that's not a given, by the way. Some people do go through really tough stuff, but because they have the right support, they actually don't develop PTSD, which is really interesting. But that's a conversation for another time. But basically, complex PTSD is something that it's an environment that we've been in, or people that we've been around over a long period of time. And it's not just possibly the flashbacks or the emotional flashbacks and all of those things. It's the way that we have begun to behave in relationship to other people, and it's the way that we have begun to feel about ourselves as people. So, as an example, if you've been in an accident, like in a vehicle, if you were in an accident, obviously that might threaten your sense of safety when you're travelling on that particular vehicle, or any type of travelling that you're doing. You might get anxious and all of that kind of thing. But it doesn't necessarily make you believe something different about yourself, not necessarily. Whereas complex PTSD, we might have kind of suffered other people's long-term abuse and neglect in a way that has begun to shape our view of ourselves, of the world, of other people, of relationships in general. And that's why it's very different to complex PTSD. I think what's happening in the brain, yes, it's still technically trauma. Yes, they're both different types of trauma. But the complex stuff starts to have an effect on your personality, how easily you trust other people, all kinds of different things. And that's why it's complex, because of how it affects you so differently. And so where we might be able to treat PTSD, simple PTSD, in a handful of sessions. For me, it took 2 hours to overcome my PTSD, which was really quite severe. But it took 2 hours and it's never come back. I've never had a flashback, a nightmare, nothing. Even when confronted with that same topic as an adult, I wasn't triggered. I was upset, but I wasn't triggered, and that's the difference. So when it comes to complex PTSD, these are the 4 things that we need to keep in mind. And it doesn't necessarily happen exactly in this order, and there might be bits that you come back to later, but roughly speaking, this is generally how it goes. And especially when I'm working with people, because it's really important to get certain things sorted before we do step 3, which I'll talk to you about. So step 1 is all around emotional integration and reintegration. So often in surviving our environments or the people that we've been around who've had a negative effect on us over time, our relationship to our own emotions has changed. There might be certain emotions that it was too expensive to have or wasn't safe enough to have. I see it a lot that some people either don't have much of a sense of anger, or some people have a very overwhelming sense of anger. There's all sorts of different things in there. And also joy. When we've suffered that kind of environment that's resulted in complex PTSD, it may be that our relationship with joy is complicated or actually not that strong. Even though I consider myself to very much be thriving after trauma and very successful, very good trauma treatment, there are still times when I experience big joy that I find that quite overwhelming. And it takes a lot to sit with it, and I'm getting much better at it, much more practiced with it, but it's still quite an overwhelming thing. Whereas to folks who don't have the same background as me and maybe you, we might find that a little bit more difficult to hold and quite physically uncomfortable and neurologically uncomfortable. That's really normal. So stabilising the emotions and doing this work around the emotions, creating healthy relationships with our emotions, that's really important part, and that helps us to stabilise, because in the coming steps we need to be able to have good relationships with our emotions in order to move forwards. So step 1 is emotions. Step 2 is beliefs. So then we start to look at what have my experiences made me believe about myself, other people, relationships, and are those beliefs that are helping me, and do I want to believe something different? And obviously we're not going to encourage you to gaslight yourself into believing something different. It's just really useful to have an idea about where you are at the moment with what you believe and where you would like to end up. And obviously we can come to a sort of healthy compromise sometimes, because for us, as an example, if you have suffered badly at the hands of other human beings, we wouldn't want to replace that belief with the belief that all humans are good, because that's not safe and it's not true. But we might change it for something like, I believe in my own ability to keep myself as safe as possible and to honour my intuition. So again, we're not necessarily changing it for, I will be safe forevermore, nothing bad will ever happen to me. We can't make ourselves that kind of promise, but we can be empowered and in connection with our intuition, so that all of that is much easier to do and you feel less stressed about it. And when the focus goes away from other people, what are other people doing, and more towards the self, how do I feel? Do I feel safe? Do I get green flags from this person? Does my body feel relaxed in this situation? That feels much more like empowerment. And obviously your body can only do so much, but it does a hell of a job of keeping you safe once we give it space and we build that relationship with our body, and that eventually it will keep us safe, and it's much easier that way. It feels much better. So that's step 2. And that might be a difficult space to hold, because if we still have trauma around something, the idea that we can never be 100% safe ever again in our lives can be quite a difficult thing to face. But I'll tell you what, it's much easier once you go through step 3, which is around actually processing our trauma. People will often say to me, oh, I've processed my trauma with a therapist. I'm like, what do you mean when you say you processed it? And they're like, oh, we talked it through, and I've got a really healthy attitude to it now. And I'm like, right. I've made other videos about this, but trauma processing is a very specific thing that you're doing with your brain. It's not the same as talking it through. It's not the same as adjusting your mindset to it or anything like that. It's an emotional experience that we give the brain to let the brain finish with that memory, that experience, that body feeling. So as an example, very happy to share mine. I won't share it in great detail just because I want you to be able to hear the message without getting upset or triggered. So I'm just going to give you just the broad picture. I went through an assault when I was a child by an adult man. That's all I will say. Just, I'm comfortable to speak about it and share about it, but I want you to get value from what I'm saying. So just in case that topic is difficult for you, that's all I will say. That's all that will be said about it. And so when I did my trauma processing on that particular memory, I went back as adult me to talk to little me the morning after the incident had happened. So we didn't even really relive, we didn't talk about, we didn't get into the thing that happened. I was able to really nurture and hold space for my younger self and allow them to process what had happened, to ask the questions that they couldn't ask at the time. It was a really healing experience, very, very emotional. There was a lot of snot and tissues involved, but it wasn't triggering, and that's the difference. It's really important in my work, at least from what I've been taught and how I work, that we don't re-trigger. And when it comes to complex PTSD, obviously it might not be that cut and dry. A lot of people have complex trauma but don't remember a lot of where it came from or where it began, or that one particular incident. It might be a group of incidents. So then we might look to transform trauma that's more of a feeling rather than a memory. And we do similar work. We go back and we might have a conversation with your younger self. There are loads of different tools there. It's not just that single one, but it really depends on the person, what they need, and what we've worked out together is going to be best for them and what they feel ready for as well, because this is a very client-led experience. I don't tell people what to do. We kind of work it out together and we trust their body to tell them, yes, this is a goer, or no, it's not. And then we work our way through it the way that the body leads us. So that's the actual trauma processing part. Once you have processed a trauma properly, it shouldn't really come back after that. There may be aspects around it that can be triggered later that we didn't know was there at the time. So people do come back to me occasionally after we finished work, just as a one-off, because they found something that we didn't find together despite looking. And that's really normal for other bits to pop up again in the future, just because our life has moved on and something has come up and you're like, oh, I didn't know that was there, and then we can sort it and it's quite quick. But generally, if you've processed trauma, it shouldn't come up, really. Or if it does, not in the same way, there might be a different aspect that we haven't addressed before. But generally speaking, once you've processed it, it should be done with, and it should be filed away in your brain, just like any other memory, like having toast yesterday morning for breakfast. Obviously, it's still okay to be emotional about it. It's very normal. You probably won't feel totally neutral about it, but it shouldn't be, really harrowing or haunting anymore. When I look back at my younger self, the moment that I think about my younger self and that situation, all I feel is love for my younger self. And that can make me very emotional, but it's not a horrible thing that I'm remembering or feeling anymore. So that's the difference. And the fourth step is the future. So I would love to tell you that in all of this sort of brain wizardry, that I could kind of plonk all of the things you need and want into your brain and just do it. But actually that's the part where we start to talk about what kind of life do you want. If you want more friends, you have enough close friends that you can have a healthy relationship with, because that often will change in this work. The way we relate to others becomes healthier, and some people we know will come along with us on that journey and other people might not. So that's a very real thing that happens for a lot of people, that we can outgrow some people, or kind of we're no longer aligned with them as friends, and that's totally normal as well. But all that being said, looking to the future then it's quite odd to have lived with trauma for such a long time and then get to a point where suddenly you don't have it anymore. And I think it's quite magical. And but it can be really weird. So we put in some planning around that. How do you picture your life being? How do you want to feel? How much company do you want to have? Some people are like, I would really love a couple of good friends, and other people are like, oh wow, I want to be surrounded by lovely people, and you can have that as well. And we work towards creating a life that you couldn't have before because you were living with trauma. and then we work towards creating something that you feel really excited about, that feels fulfilling, that meets deep emotional needs, because often once you've done your trauma work, you have so much more space for that. It's absolutely amazing, incredible. And I really wish that for anyone who's listening to this or watching this, I really wish all of this for you, whether you ever come and speak to me or not. And, I think for a lot of us who've been through what we've been through, I really believe in our right to have a lovely, healthy and happy life. As much, whatever that might mean for us as individuals. Obviously everyone's version is different. So those are the 4 steps. I hope that that's been helpful. I'm Harris and I founded the Centre for Childhood Trauma Healing. And if this is all sounding like really good to you and something you might consider doing, I invite you to come and have a free assessment with me. The button or the link will be below. You can come and have an assessment. We can talk about where you are and what's possible for you, and I promise you it's good news. I've worked with people who have some more complex needs. I'm also neurodivergent. I have ADHD and autism. I'm also non-binary. I work a lot with the queer community. I very much have used the word empath for myself in the past, not as much recently, but I still definitely vibe with that word. So I work with all sorts of different people, and I think the bottom line is, if you feel that this is work that you need to do and that you want to do, and you've reached a point where change is necessary, then I would love to support you. And even if we meet, it's not a hard sell. Even if we meet and you decide that actually you need certain other things, I'm very happy to point you in the right direction of anything else. I will not badger you to work with me. I trust you to make your own decision. And actually part of recovering from what we've been through is trusting ourselves that we can make a good decision for us, and not under duress or anything. All right, so I will never do that. I think it's immoral to push people to buy something. I genuinely offer out my assessment appointments with love, and to really hopefully give you an idea, because if you're anything like me, you've not really possibly found other places to really give you a good picture of what's going on and what you need and what the options are. So I hope that's been helpful. I hope you can still see me, because the light is fading as I'm recording this and I didn't have a light on. But I hope that's been helpful. If you want to come and book a free 30-minute assessment, go and look for the link, or it's on my website at mooksharrishill.com. All right, take care. Bye.